Tyler has given me the honor of introducing him tonight, and it's going to be a little bit, I'm not going to tell you where Tyler went to school or where he grew up or any of that sort of thing. I'm going to tell you why I'm supporting Tyler and why it's sort of an odd situation that I am supporting Tyler. My brother-in-law is Mike Mansfield, who is the namesake of Senator Mansfield, and that is his uncle, and I'm married to his sister. He called me about 9 months ago and said, there's a young man named Tyler Gernant who's running for Congress, Bill. He's a Democrat, and he'd like me to be his finance chairman. He said, would you go talk to him before I agree to this and see if he has 2 arms, 2 legs, and the whole thing. And so I said, sure, I'll go do that. So I went there, and Tyler and I met over a cup of coffee, and I need to tell you that I am I wouldn't say I'm a right-wing, but I'm a Republican, and believe in a lot of the things that Republicans believe in. And Tyler and I sat down, and what I felt by the time that we had actually ended our conversation was that I had met a very honest, a man with integrity, a man with objectives and goals, who would sit down and actually represent me and be the kind of person that I want representing me in my government for Montana. The issues weren't at this point for me all that important. What I'm yearning for is a government that I can actually talk to, converse with, who will empathize with some of my issues and will meet me halfway, and that we can work things out and compromise. And so the reason that I'm really on the bandwagon for Tyler is that he has all of those qualities. I've kind of lived my life also knowing I'm not the smartest guy in the world, so my instincts have helped me get to where I am today. And my instincts were loud and clear that Tyler was that kind of person. And the other thing that he did, lastly, was that in all of our conversations, as you can tell as I drone on here, Tyler listened a lot more than he talked. And that was a quality of Mike Mansfield. That if you watched him on Meet the Press or whatever, these reporters would get up and they would say, they'd do a 3-minute question to the guy, and then he would go, yes, or he'd go, no. And they'd be waiting for him to come with more, and he'd say, I answered your question. Tyler's a lot like that. He's very thoughtful. My instincts tell me that he'll represent us well. So I want to give you the next congressman from Montana, and this is one Republican that will be voting for.
Good evening and welcome to the historic Wilma Theater. As you all know, today is Groundhog Day. And just like that classic film starring Bill Murray, Dennis Freeberg has been reliving the same day over and over and over again since 2001. He's been stuck in yesterday, thinking that there will be no tomorrow, and as a result, no long-term consequences for his actions. Yet each day we wake up to see bigger budget deficits, fewer jobs, and folks in Washington who think that responsibility means blaming others. But today we're here to change that. Today we can finally step out of Congressman Freeberg's shadow and remind him that responsibility isn't about finding a scapegoat. It's about finding a solution. And so I stand before you today prepared to take on that responsibility and declare myself a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. You know, I think we all know that we're facing some pretty difficult times, but quite frankly, I wouldn't be running if this were easy. You know, if this were 2000 and we had a $200 billion budget surplus and we were creating jobs and growing the economy, I wouldn't be interested in this race. I'm running because I've seen too many of my friends lose their jobs over the last year and a half and have to leave the state to find work. I'm running because if we don't balance our checkbook, the programs that we hold dear, programs like Social Security and Medicare, aren't going to be around for the next generation. Because if we don't balance that checkbook, we're not going to be able to institute the kinds of progressive programs that we all need. And I'm running most importantly because we need to restore responsibility to Washington. And by responsibility, I don't mean one about assigning blame. I mean about taking hold of our problems and finding solutions together. And that kind of responsibility is something that was born into me through 4 generations of Montanans. My great-grandfather homesteaded up near Whitetail, which, for those of you that don't know where that is, which I'm guessing is probably most of you, that's a small town up in the far northeast corner of the state, in between Plentywood and Scobie. And as any descendant of a homesteader knows, they had a whole lot of problems to deal with. From there, our family really fanned out across the state. I had a grandpa who worked at the smelter in Anaconda. My other grandpa worked as a truck driver in Great Falls. And it was through their hard work that they were able to send both of my parents to Carroll College, which is where they first met. After college, my folks moved here to Missoula, where I was born, and my dad became a high school math teacher and football coach over at Hellgate, and my mom worked at what was then the Apple Tree Restaurant. And although I didn't know it at the time, that sense of responsibility that had been born into me really led to my interest in politics. And specifically, I can remember one story. Back when I was about 10 years old, I had set my sights on just this little black and white TV set. At that point in time, my family only had one TV set in the whole house. So that TV meant more to me than just a new toy. It meant freedom, because for the first time I could actually watch what I wanted to watch. Unfortunately, it also meant $60 because my parents weren't going to pay for a TV set for me. And since my only source of steady income at that point in time was $1 a week allowance, it was a pretty lengthy proposition. And coincidentally, the 1992 presidential elections were going on at the same time. And because I didn't have my own TV set, I had to watch those Ross Perot infomercials with my parents. And I remember one thing that Ross Perot said that really struck a chord with me. He said that if we have to balance our checkbook, then why doesn't the government? And I thought to myself, you know, that's right. If I have to scrimp and save for this little measly black and white TV, why doesn't the government have to save up to buy what it wants? Fortunately, I've learned a little bit more about economics since then. But, you know, I thought that's right. And Dennis Rehberg has never really gotten that sense of responsibility. You know, he took office in 2001, and we had over $100 billion budget surplus. We haven't balanced the budget since. We now have over $12 trillion in national debt, and if you include the unfunded obligations of Social Security and Medicare, that debt approaches $56 trillion, which means that each one of us would owe $175,000 just to pay that off. So while he sits here and talks about fiscal responsibility being at the very core of his being, he's voting for tax cuts for the wealthiest among us that eliminate the budget surplus and return us to deficit spending. He voted to put 2 wars on our credit card. And he voted for one of the biggest boondoggles for big pharmaceutical companies that essentially allowed them to charge our government whatever they wanted for prescription drugs. So while he's sitting here whispering these sweet nothings about fiscal responsibility into our ear, he's stealing our credit card and spending our money like a drunken sailor. But the truth is, like I said, this isn't about assigning blame. This is about working together to find solutions. And although there's no single solution that will solve our budget crisis, there's a lot of things we can be doing. First and foremost, I think we need to reinstitute the pay-go system, which was a system we had back in the 90s that essentially said that every item of new spending had to be accompanied with a way to pay for it. We had that in the 90s and we balanced the budget. That expired in 2002 and we haven't balanced the budget since. Beyond